Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you like these videos. Today, I want to talk about the first time that I realized that inmates were just human beings or regular people just like anybody else. My background is, I've worked in corrections for 26 and a half years. And whenever you come into corrections and prison environment, you are trained and taught to hate or dislike inmates. You're trained to think of them as not like you or just not in a good way. All negatives, very few positives. But if you evolve as a human being, as a man, or any of that, you begin to understand that inmates are people. They're just people that's either had bad upbringing. They might be somebody that had a good home and just made bad choices. There's lots of factors into it other than a blanket prejudice or a blanket statement that they're all bad, because nothing in life is that absolute. And you have to understand that there's good and bad in everything. So, in my journey through my career, when I first came in to the prison I worked, it was around 900 to 1,000 inmates. Uh, the population always fluctuated, but uh, on average, it was between 1,000 and 1,200 inmates, and all different kinds of charges, all different kinds of sentences. Uh, you had classifications from ones to fives, one being the lowest, five being the max. Um, and you read different stories in their files when you're doing intake and processing. When a new inmate comes in, they come into intake, which is where they do a 30-day evaluation on them, and you get to classify them, do their background histories, and learn about them. And there's all kinds of stories to to these human beings, because you have people that have DUIs, they have addiction problems. Majority of people in prison have some type of substance abuse problem, which drives them to commit crimes to get their drugs. So I guess the point of this video is to understand that when you're away outside looking in, you just think they're all horrible people. But when you're on the inside and you get to know people and you get to deal with them on a daily basis, you understand that you might be on the other side, but looking from outside in. But once you dig down into it a little bit better, you understand that some people didn't have a chance in life, and some people were born into circumstances where they were doomed from the start. And if you are, you know, I take for example, there's one individual I can remember. Um, he was in on a drug charge. He had been robbing places to get drugs. But after you delve in and look at his history, his mother introduced him to drugs at like 7, 8 years old, was shooting him up with heroin at 10 years old. So a guy like that, how much, with no father and no structure, no family support, so how does a human being like that ever make it? So when you start to see those things and you start to experience those things, you tend to start to have a little different perspective. Now, there's some people who had a full family, and they just made horrible choices and did stupid things. And those people you can't feel sorry for. In my experience, there's three different categories that I put inmates in. You have the number one is the inmate that made a mistake. This is one time he screwed up. He went to prison. He learned some stuff, got some programs and trade, whatever. Gets out, and you never see him again. The second type of inmate is the chronic or the habitual person who is just has bad, evil spirit within them, and they constantly go to jail, and they want to do things their way. They rebel against authority. They have they don't give a fuck about nobody attitude. They could care less about somebody dying. They don't care about anything. They have just this evilness to them. And then the third person is the person that just can't get it right and have some type of mental issues like schizophrenia, uh, some type of mental illness and things like that. Those people should not be housed in prison. They should be in a mental institution somewhere. But instead, since they cut a lot of those fundings for those things, those people end up in prison. And you have people talking to themselves and being victimized in prison because they don't have any safety mechanism around them, and they're thrown in prison. They're just warehoused, and they might give them medication or something, but they're never they're never treated for their issues. And there's some treatment, but there's never enough because there's it's hard to house them. It's hard to give them the proper mental health treatment in prison because just the logistics of prison makes it hard to do that. And I know I said three, but a fourth one that kind of comes to mind is these young kids that come to prison that believe all the hype on the rap videos and the movies and TV and all that nonsense where they think they could shoot somebody and prison is glorious, and they don't realize once they get to prison that shit don't fly and they get hurt and they become the victim and they become the one that gets brutalized because they believed all that hype, and then now they got themselves in a situation where there's real killers and there's real people that will hurt them, and they didn't sign up for that. But lastly, the story I want to tell is as my journey came along through corrections, I you really get to see the humanness of inmates when, let's just say, their mother or their father or somebody close to them dies. And there was a guy that was dying of cirrhosis of the liver. I met him briefly, and he was only in my program where I worked for about a week, and his he was shipped out emergency on one. It was like a Tuesday. They shipped him out, and then within like 4 or 5 days, he was dead. But long story short, when that whole process happened, they were trying to get a medical respite for him, and I think his name was Russell. I think, but anyway, he was taken to the local hospital, and he went straight into the ICU, and they were trying to figure out how they could maybe get him some help to keep him alive, but he needed a liver transplant immediately, and his kidneys started to fail, so his organs his body began to shut down. And I know I had to go down to have him sign some paperwork to get a medical respite because they was trying to get him home before he died. And talking to him on that bed was a very deep thing that happened where you have this white guy with a big swastika on his chest, and He's lived a certain life, and I'm the person that walks in to try to get him help, try to get him home before he dies. And the one thing that stuck out to me, and which has kind of been the impact over the years, is he was afraid to die. He knew he was going to die, and he didn't know whether he was going to go to heaven or hell. And if you see a human being in that state where they're most vulnerable, where you're handcuffed to a bed and you're going to die, and you live this horrible life of drugs and in and out of prison and no real connections and those types of things, and then you're in the process of knowing that you could be going to hell because you don't know how to pray, or you don't know how to ask for forgiveness for everything your life has brought you to the end. You kind of want to have some relief. During that process, I asked him if he knew God, and I asked him if he knew how to pray the sinner's prayer and all that kind of stuff. And so we went through that process. He did that, and he, to me, it's just like, it doesn't matter what you do in life, it's how you end your life, and how hopefully that you all can find, a person can find peace at the end of the road. Whether you believe or you don't believe, that's on you. But I believe that even in those circumstances, even in that dynamic, because I think God puts people in people's paths for a reason, that God put a black man in front of a white guy that was a racist uh, person in his thought process, but he really, deep down inside, when it comes down to it, it's like one of my uncles used to say: "There's you never meet an atheist in a foxhole." When he was over in Vietnam, when you're about to die, you all that other stuff can go away because you're in a deep transitioning phase of your life, and you know that it's over. So when it all comes down to it, and it's all said and done, we're all humans, and we all live and breathe the same air. And yeah, people do horrible things, but there's good and bad in everything. And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make. That there's good and bad in everything. There's good inmates, bad inmates. There's good correctional officers, bad correctional officers. Good correctional staff, bad correctional staff. So think about those things whenever you're journeying through life, and no, don't put a broad brush on people, and try to see the good in people, and always remember, stay on the other side.